Welcome everyone to the February community call for Office add-ins. If you don't already have the recurring monthly series in your calendar, you can download it using this link. And our next call will be exactly a month from today, March 13th. So in each call, for those of you who haven't joined us before, we talk a little bit about, learn about what's new with the Office.js APIs and Office add-ins platform. We get a chance to interact with members of the product team that are behind Office add-ins. And we typically do a technical deep dive to learn in depth about a particular subject and do some Q&A at the end. So today's call, we'll start off as we typically do with an overview of Office add-ins for anybody who's new to this technology. We have a couple of calls for feedback. And our deep dive today is a topic that'll be of interest to all of you, I believe, Edge WebView control and our plans to move in that direction. And lastly, we have Lance Austin. Sorry, somebody unmuted there. We have Lance Austin, a customer from BXB Digital, joining us today. I'm sorry, can somebody mute somebody who's not muted there? Okay, we have Lance Austin from BXB Digital, who's here to talk about their Office.js journey, why they chose the Office add-ins platform, and what they've learned along the way. And like I said, we'll close out with some Q&A. So feel free along the way to add your questions to the chat window, and we'll address those either as we go or at the end. So I'm Kim Brandel. My colleague is in the room with us. We also have Steve here, Senior Program Manager with Office Platform. And as I mentioned, Lance Austin from BXB Digital is joining us as well. With that, I'll hand off to Doug. Before I do so, can everybody make sure, if you're not presenting, can you please go ahead and mute? Hearing some background noise there. All right, perfect. All right, Doug, off to you.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to just take a minute or two here to talk about the overall architecture of Office add-ins, and most of you on the call are very familiar with this. However, if you're new to Office add-ins, or if you're familiar with the old COM style add-ins that we had for many years in the past, then this will help you get a sense of the context within which everything else we'll be talking about today applies. So the basic concept is you have web apps. We all know how to build web apps with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and an Office add-in is simply a web app. So one way to look at it is the only thing that makes it an Office add-in is you create this manifest file, and we have tooling that does this for you. You don't need to know that schema. But when you create the manifest file, it points at your web app, and then it is an add-in. And then you can take that manifest file, and we call it side loading. You as a developer can load it onto various devices that run the Office clients, and you can test your add-in there. And then once you've got it to where you want it, you can publish it to the Office store. The only thing that goes in the store is that little manifest file that points at your web app that you've built. So since it's a web app, it can do anything any other web app can do. You can call web APIs, use cloud services, and so on. You can also, of course, use Microsoft Graph, and we have single sign-on experience to simplify that. That's one of the topics we'll be asking for feedback on today as we make that smoother and smoother for developers. And then the final piece of the puzzle is an Office add-in written this way can use the Office.js library to get at the content of the open document. So that's how you can make your add-in read and write in and out of Excel cells or PowerPoint slides or a Word document or an Outlook email and so on. So that's just a very quick high-level tour. And if you want to learn more about developing Office add-ins, that link there on this slide is where all of the documentation our team owns is, and we love feedback about how to make that better. So that's Office add-ins.
Awesome, thanks, Doug. All right, before we get to Sudhir's presentation about the Edge WebView control, just a couple of calls for your feedback. We'd love to have your input. We mentioned this briefly last month in last month's call about single sign-on. Nitesh is the new PM for single sign-on, and he's really looking for your feedback to understand your customer needs around SSO. So we have a form here, the AKA MS link is on this slide. Office add-ins SSO. We'd love for you to complete this form if you're using SSO or interested in potentially implementing SSO in your add-ins in the future, to give us some feedback about your use case. And also, Nitesh's email address is here as well. So if you'd like to engage with him further beyond the form, feel free to reach out as well. And he'll actually be joining us next month's call to do a presentation about SSO and kind of a look at, what it's looked like up until now and talk about some of the types of changes we're considering making. And so that'll be next month's call. And the second thing we'd love to have your feedback on is our Office Developer Program folks are doing some research around ways to improve the resources and tools that are available to you as developers building Office add-ins. So we'd love to hear from you about what tools and resources are most valuable to you and what tools and resources are missing, and some other questions on that form too. It's a quick, short form, take you probably 3 minutes to complete. Here's the AKA-MS link for that form. We would love to have your feedback on that. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Sudhir. He's here to talk about our plans to implement the Edge WebView control for Office add-ins. Sudhir?
Thanks, Kim. Hey, folks. I'm Sudhir. I'm a program manager on the Office platform team, along with Kim and Doug. So I'm really excited to talk about some of the new things that are coming up from a platform standpoint for Office add-ins. Kim, if you can go to the next slide for me. So first thing, I'll start off by saying, as Doug mentioned, of course, add-ins at the sort of the core of them are web pages. So we need a web control or a web environment to basically execute and run those add-ins, if you will. And the way we do this is we use the headless web control on all the different platforms to execute your add-in and sort of make it available or render it right next to Office. Before all that, though, I just wanted to take a pause and say we hear your voice, we hear your feedback constantly. We're looking for feedback. Of course, the surveys that we've been sharing and all the different community calls that we do. Your feedback is critical for us. That's one of the avenues by which we've learned. We know that this is a critical sort of the thing that I'm going to be sharing with you is a critical piece of the platform for you. If you were to go to user voice and search for Edge, you can see a number of sort of apps. If people mute themselves, that'd be great. There's a bit of background noise. So saying user voice, a bunch of requests on Edge and sort of making Edge control available for Office add-ins is one of the top asks. Again, my point being, we hear you, we hear your feedback. If you do have additional features or requests, definitely go out to user voice and add your feature request out there, please, because we are constantly looking at it. All right, so I think the presentation, okay, there it is. So if you can go to the next slide, Kim.
1 second, Sudhir, sorry about that.
No worries. So you'll see that as Kim's working on the presentation again, you'll see a bit more detail on what that particular feedback was in this case for the Edge WebView, sort of talking about how Edge has been out there for a couple of years now, and we should be using Edge versus IE11 as the platform for Office add-ins. Again, so thank you for that feedback. If you can go to the next one for me, Kim. So the thing that I wanted to announce, and there are a couple of calls to action at the end of this deck as well for you folks who currently have an add-in in the Office store or thinking about building an add-in for the Office store. There are a couple of calls to action. But with this, we wanted to announce that the new modern Edge web control is available for Office add-ins as the runtime for Office add-ins on Win32, where that control is available. We'll get into some of the technical details around the version numbers and for Windows and the version numbers of Office in just a bit. But this is an exciting new step in sort of bringing a modern control over to Office add-ins on Win32. Kim, again, can you go to the next slide? So this one just sort of paints the current landscape of what we use across the different platforms for Office add-ins. You'll see that as of today in production, we're using Win32. For Win32, we use the IE Trident engine. That's the IE11 engine. Of course, on Mac, we use WebKit 2. On Android, we use Chromium and so on and so forth. So pretty much saying that we use the default control that is shipped with the platform to render and sort of run the Office add-ins alongside the Office host, if you will. If you want more information on the version numbers and for browsers as well as the operating systems, there's a link out there on this deck. Take a look at that, and you'll sort of see the lowest version that we support per platform and the web control that we use, if you will. Next slide for me, please. Thanks. So just a couple of quick things on Edge. Edge is the latest modern web control that's available on Windows 10. It is performant and standards compliant, much more so than IE11. It supports the full set of HTML5 features, including things like media and recording and location. One of the scenarios that one of our partners was talking about a while ago was to be able to in Outlook, sort of launch their add-in, find the closest location for their retail center, and point people, within the email to that particular location center as the meeting location, if you will. That you can do that with IE11. That is something that you can do with the Edge WebView control. Of course, with recording and things like that, there are scenarios where our partners wanted to be able to record voice or playback voice directly on the within the add-in, if you will. Something that you couldn't do with IE11, which you can do with the new Edge WebView control. So a bunch of new features, basically the full set of HTML5 capabilities coming to you as part of this web control, if you will. And last but not the least, it supports the latest JavaScript specifications. So 2015 plus is what Edge currently supports, and the Edge control currently supports, which again should make the JavaScript that you write, sort of standards compliant, if you will. So here's the version number information, if you will. So that's the 19XX. That's the Windows 19XX and Office, that version number that you see on the screen over there. We're gonna have Edge roll out as the default control for Office add-ins. What that basically means, if you go to the next slide for me, Kim, we can talk about the impact of that. So what that means is starting that version of Windows, the latest version of Windows, the version of Office that you see over here, Edge will be the default control. On any builds lower than 19XX, so 18XX Windows builds, we will continue to use IE Trident as the default web control. That's because the Edge control is just not available on those versions of the operating system. And what this basically means is you, as an add-in developer, will have to make sure that your add-in works both in IE and in Edge. A quick note on that, we've done the due diligence of testing a bunch of add-ins from the store, both in IE11 and the new Edge control, and we have not found any issues at all. So the changes that you'll likely have to make, if any, would be fairly minimal. So just a quick call out on that. But again, it is up to you as the developer, as the person that owns your code, to make sure that your add-in is running both in the Trident engine, the IE engine, as well as the new Edge web control, if you will. And of course, this does not impact any non-Win32 operating systems or Office versions below that number that you see, the 113.26.20,000 version number that you see on the screen out there. So yeah, this is primarily just for Win32, Win10, in the latest versions of Win10, if you will. Okay. All right. So here's the big main call to action. We need all of you on the call, all of you out there who have an add-in in the store or developing an add-in in the store or for the store, to go out and test your add-in with the new Edge control and give us feedback. Make sure that any changes that you need for the add-in are sort of done to make sure that it works both in the new control as well as the old control. If you run into issues, you can go out to GitHub under that Office Dev/Office.js node, and you can report your issue out there. Just before you sort of go out there on GitHub and start sort of logging issues, if you will, just a couple of call outs. Since it is your code, it is your responsibility to make sure that any changes that are required to make your add-in work across both these different browser controls, if you will, is your responsibility. Only report issues that you cannot address. Things like, I just started using my add-in in the Edge control and Office crashed, or I started using the Edge control and for whatever reason I can't see scroll bars anymore, or something is funky with the way things are on the screen that I can't control, as in you, the developer, can't control. So only report those issues that are sort of beyond your general web development expertise, general web development principles and practices, if you will. But certainly do report issues that you encounter, because we'll be looking at it and making sure that it is a smooth transition, if you will, from the Edge, the IE control to the Edge control in the new versions of Office and Windows. To go out and test it, though, you will have to be in the Windows and Office Insider programs. Again, the versions of Office and Windows, you should be getting the minimum versions you should be getting is out there on the screen. But really, if you're in the Insider program, I strongly recommend that you get the latest version of Office and the latest version of Windows, because we have been actively working to sort of address a number of issues, and the latest version of both these software pieces, if you will, would have sort of the best experience for you at this point. One additional thing that you'll have to do after you get the latest versions is to make sure that you go out and enable this flight in Office. So if you are in the Insiders program, if you go out to the Outspace, that's the when you click on File and then you click on Options, there's going to be an experiment tab out there that you click on, and you have to make sure that this flight is enabled in the experiment tab on the options window, on the options dialog box, if you will. And this basically says, tells Office to use the new Edge WebView control to render and run Office add-ins as opposed to using the IE Trident control. Once you do that, you just sort of restart the Office app. And then your Office add-ins, when you launch an Office add-in, it should automatically start using the new Edge WebView control. Okay, and by the way, with the new control, if you're using the new WebView control for running Office add-ins, you can use the new Edge DevTools for this. It's sort of the equivalent to the F12 experience that you have or had with the IE Trident control. This is a much better experience. This is an app that you can download from the Windows Store. And again, provides very similar and additional capabilities to the F12 experience that you had with the IE Trident control. Okay. So here's just a quick sort of outline of that timeline that we're looking at this point from releasing this control perspective. Certainly at this point, we're looking for as much feedback as possible from you. That's sort of now and until the end of February, we're actively working on our code base. We're fixing a bunch of issues. We're looking to roll out the Edge control on more calls like this to more partners, if you will. And then by the end of March, again, based on all the feedback that we gather between now and the end of March, we want to take this out to production. We want to make this available as the default control on the versions of Office and Windows where this is supported. So that's sort of what we're looking at from a timeline standpoint. That end of March fork from an Office standpoint will be available for customers, generally available for customers by the middle of April. And there's links down there at the bottom of the slide that sort of talk about, if you're not in the Office Insiders and the Windows Insiders program, how to get to those programs and sort of test out early bits, if you will, of Office and Windows. So do definitely go take a look at that if you're not part of the Insiders program at this point. And the last one that I wanted to talk about before I open it up for questions or anything like that at this point on the call was some of the known issues with the current version of Office, the latest version of Office and Windows, if you were in the Insiders program. The first one is you might see an error. Actually, you will see an error that says error occurred while trying to reach your add-in from localhost. So imagine a scenario where you're developing an add-in or you're sideloading an add-in. Doug mentioned sideloading at the beginning of this call. If you're sideloading an add-in, you would likely be sideloading an add-in from localhost, localhost being the host on your local computer. If you do that, you will get this error. It's a loopback exemption. And I've got steps over here to sort of get beyond that exception. So take a look at that. Once you add that exemption, I think you will not see this error with using the Edge WebView control. So that's something that we need you to do, especially if you're testing your add-in from localhost. The second one, you'll see there's a GitHub link out there where all certificates have to be in the computer store and not just the user store at this point. This is a bug we're addressing today, in the last week or so. So if you get the latest build this week or next week, this issue will be addressed, and any certificate in the user store will also be acceptable. But for now, if you get a version from of Office, you want to make sure that you sort of go to that GitHub link and follow the instructions to add any certificates to the computer store. And then the last one over here, navigating to subdomains of the source location is broken. Again, this is something that we're addressing or have been addressing over the last few days to a week or so. So it might take a little bit to get that build out into the insiders forks. But this is an error where imagine if you have contoso.com in your source location in the manifest, navigating to something.contoso.com sort of pops up in a new window in some of the builds. So the workaround that I have for you right now is to make sure that that something.contoso.com is in your app domains. So any subdomain sort of navigation, we want to make sure that all those subdomains are in the app domains, so that we can allow in-place navigation of those URLs. But again, just a quick note: all these, at least the bottom two of these issues, will be addressed hopefully in the next week or so, if you will. So if you keep getting the latest builds from Office and Windows, you shouldn't see the bottom two issues. Okay. So I know I've said a lot. I'm going to pause over here and open it up to any questions, feedback, or thoughts at this point from folks on the call.
Folks are adding questions to the IM chat here along the way as you were talking. So if you can start there, maybe just kind of scroll up in the chat window and maybe you can talk to some of those questions as a starting point. And folks, feel free to add more questions to the IM chat as Sudhir talks about the existing questions.
So Daniel's question, yes, that is correct. That's a reasonable expectation. I do want you to go test out your add-in in the new control as well, because know that a browser is sort of built on top of the web controller and adds a bunch more features and functionality and stuff like that. So there's no 100% guarantee that what you see in the browser is exactly what you see in the control. But it's definitely a reasonable stake in the ground. But again, I definitely do want you to go out and test the feature using the control as well. Charles says, I don't think we can enable feature flight. Okay, so let me follow up on that. I believe you should be able to. If you're not able to, what we are going to do is make sure that that control is the default control for the insiders builds. Okay, so again, I will follow up on that. Make sure that you are able to enable feature flights. If you're not able to enable feature flights, we will ensure that the Edge WebView control in those versions of Office that I have on the slide deck is the default control in the insiders builds. All right, so Lance says he's excited for this. Thank you. Yes, we are super excited as well. How is Edge and V8 announcement factor into this? Would that remove the Win10 requirement? So I believe you're talking about the new Chromium control that Edge is looking to use. Is that correct, Lance?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So quick note on that. So yes, you all have seen the announcement from Edge potentially, or actually sort of working on the new Chromium control. Know that we're working very, very closely with the Edge team right now. That control is still in development. It's going to take a bit of time for the Edge team to sort of make that available. And then a little bit more time beyond that for us in Office to sort of consume that control for the Office add-ins platform. But know that as soon as that becomes available, we will make it available to you via a program similar to this one. But the reason we're not holding back the Edge WebView control until then is to make sure that you folks have the latest and greatest modern control available on the platform as soon as possible. The timelines on that new Chromium controller are still a little bit TBD, but again, you should hear more about that hopefully in the coming months, if you will. Does that help, Lance?
Yeah, great, thanks.
All right, so Doug seems to have answered a couple of questions. Okay, so Charles, again, as I mentioned, we'll make sure that that control is the default control for insiders if for whatever reason you're not able to enable flights in the insiders builds. Okay. Let's see. Bruno says, any possibility to have a sample of the function file that provides ULS function in TypeScript? Okay, so this seems like we need to follow up offline on this. So let me take that up, Bruno, and what is actually, can you talk about what is the issue over here? What are you trying to do?
Hi. Hi. What we are trying to achieve is that we are building an Office add-in for Outlook, and it's written. So I started using the Your generator, which allow to generate TypeScript. Within the manifest, we got options to either open a task pane or to execute a function. But because of the Webpack bundler, the actual function is either not generated because it's not exported because of TypeScript, or if you export it, it's basically wrapped within a class and the actual name is not the same as the one within the manifest. So I was wondering if when the Your generator was actually written, why an actual sample with the UI-less button with TypeScript wasn't made available.
Okay.
Or if it's possible to get one. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Thanks for the feedback. I will we'll need to follow up on this. Kim and Doug, can you help me with this one? I'm not sure. We'll just need to get in touch with the folks that developed the Yeoman generator and sort of pose this question to them.
But absolutely, we'll follow up offline. That's a great question, and we'll post the answer to this question in the blog post that we do to recap this call.
Okay, thanks.
All right, let's see the next one. Okay, that seems another Yo Office generator related question, so we'll table that for now. Vit says, do you plan to support allow from directive for X-frame options with the Chromium? It's a great question. I don't have an answer to that right now, but I'm happy to follow up on that and get you again. A lot of the technical details and timelines around the Chromium control are still being discussed. I don't have the latest and greatest to share with you at this point. I do want to make sure that the focus is on the Edge WebView control, though, at this point, and I do want folks on the call to go out and test their add-in with the new Edge WebView control. As similar to this one, as soon as we have the Chromium control available, I'll make sure to get out here and talk to you folks about it and give you sort of a chance to sort of test it and play with it before we ship this to production. Okay, but again, I don't have the timelines at this point. Let's see, is it possible to launch a content pane from the Office ribbon? It was possible for a period in the past. Then this option was then this option disappeared. Yes, so possible for a period in the past, and this option disappeared. So today, no, you're right. There is no way to launch it. Let me think about this for a second. If you look at the Bing Maps add-in in Excel, that is in the ribbon and it does launch in the task pane. Are you saying that you're not having that issue or you're not able to do that at this point? I want to be respectful of the time that we have right now, and that's also something that we should follow up online. If there are any specific questions around the web control and your testability of it, can we sort of focus on those at this point? And the other questions we can sort of follow up offline.
Yeah, that's a good plan, Sudhir. I think that's just scanning the questions here. Is that it for the Edge WebView control related questions? All right, I believe so. So we'll go ahead and end this portion of the call here then. Thanks, Sudhir, for presenting. And folks, anybody who didn't get their question answered, or if it was a question not related to Edge WebView, we'll follow up offline on those questions, and we'll include a full list of the questions in the IM chat window and answers in the blog post that we do later this week to recap this call. So keep an eye out for those. So with that said, thanks, Sudhir. Appreciate the information here. Really excited to see our movement toward the Edge WebView control.
Perfect. Thank you.
And with that, we're going to segue to our next portion of the call. Lance Austin is here. He's a customer from BXB Digital, a Brambles company in Chicago. And he's a software architect and developer. They've been building Office add-ins for several years now. It's not been without its challenges, but they've had some great learnings along the way that he'd like to share in terms of insights that may help others on the call. So he's here to talk about how they chose the Office add-in model and how they've managed to be successful with it. So Lance, take it away.
Great, thanks, Kim. Do you want me to share my screen and run
Yeah, go ahead and share your screen and you can drive there. That's fine.
All right, let me know once you guys see it. We good?
Perfect. Yep, just popped up.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks, Kim. So yeah, my name's Lance Austin. I'm a software architect and developer at BXB Digital. You can find me on GitHub at LanceEA and on Twitter at LanceAustinDev, so feel free to reach out. I started out in the IT industry for about 8 years doing integration development in the Microsoft stack, BizTalk, SOAP's web services, integrating SAP, SQL Server, SharePoint, you kind of name it. I then kind of shifted over to do more technology strategy and enterprise architecture for a few years. And then now for the last 3 years, I've been focused in BXP Digital on doing more product development and quite a bit here in the Office add-in space as well. Brambles, who is Brambles? So for folks in Australia, you might recognize us. We trade on the Australian Stock Exchange under BXB. We operate in about 60 countries. You probably have seen us so that you don't realize it. And we operate under the brand names of CHEP and IFCO. And we have about 600 million assets throughout the world, about 850 service centers. And I'll talk about a little bit more about our business model here. BXB Digital is a division of Brambles that focuses on digitizing our assets and on kind of to use the buzzwords, IoT and all the big data and all that kind of fun stuff. We have office in Silicon Valley. I work remotely out of Chicago in the US, but we also have offices in Europe and India as well. So on the bottom here, so what Brambles does is we call them pooling solutions. So basically just like a rental car, you rent out a car, you use it, you give it back. If they need to clean it or repair it, they would do so, and then goes on to, we do that for supply chain. So you'll see these big blue pallets or even big containers that are like 4 foot tall that get produce, different products. You've probably, if you've gone to any retail store, you've probably seen them. So Walmart, Costco, all those. Any of your daily stuff, deodorant, toothpaste, pop, etc., kind of travels throughout supply chains on these platforms. And when they're done using them, the manufacturers, retailers, they return them, we repair them, and we kind of. So BXB Digital is focused on first we have a hardware team that puts devices on them. And so we're now putting tracking and adding sensors to it. And all of that's getting pushed up to what we call BRICS, or Brambles Intelligence Exchange. And it's a multi-party platform that collects all this IoT data, takes in ERP data and other data sets. And then we have a data science team working on different algorithms and machine learning and all that kind of fun stuff. And ultimately coming up with information that is actionable so that people can kind of help improve their supply chains and improve the visibility. And as our marketing team likes to say, is illuminate your supply chain. And then on the top, what we've done is we've built different solutions on top of this platform. So asset tracking, where do things flow through my supply chain? How long do they stay places? Goods visibility. Are the goods that I put on there, whether it be produce or something, are they staying at the proper temperatures they should throughout the whole supply chain from the time it leaves the farmer all the way to the retailer? And then additional applications. And so my team and where I focus is kind of on the goods visibility and the additional apps. So first, before we kind of go into the journey of it, why did we want to build an Office add-in? So so I was kind of on loan still from IT, and I hadn't actually been part of BXB Digital. And I was talking to my now boss, and he kind of was like, well, we really want to make bricks a part of people's users' daily routine. We don't want it to be like this separate thing that they maybe occasionally go to. We want it to really be kind of sticky in their lives. And he came from a previous company where they had already built an Excel add-in. So he kind of felt that that was the best way to go again. And so we kind of started talking about it. And one of the things I had said, well, I'm a big proponent of reducing context switching. So the more you have to kind of switch between going to a web app, coming back down to Excel, downloading, you end up, if you're like me, you end up on Twitter or Amazon buying something, not, losing your focus. So we wanted to reduce that kind of context switching. And then also, since this is IoT data, people aren't looking at the raw sensors, but they're still looking at very large data sets and trying to really parse through it, the data. And the web can do good at aggregating and showing smaller lists, but you really need the power to be able to filter and show charts and do kind of your own stuff. Excel is just a place to do it. And so we knew that this was, and my boss at the time said, well, we need to hire a .NET developer. And so, of course, he didn't know at that time I was a .NET developer. And so I kind of raised my hand and said, well, I would take this on. That's kind of how we kind of started the journey. So 4 areas we'll kind of talk about is how we kind of went about learning and educating on the stakeholders, prototyping and learning the Office.js add-ins, how we engaged with Microsoft, and I think that one was really key to the success and for us deciding to really stick with the Office add-in model. And then 4th is on the capabilities of web platform that have kind of taken our add-in, I think, to the next level and really helped us give a good user experience. So first one is learn and educate. So like I said, my boss had previously had an add-in at another company, but it was a VSTO one. And he didn't even know the Office add-in model existed. So since I came from a Microsoft background and I had always kept track, I knew that Office add-ins existed. So I just said, well, why don't we do this as an Office add-in? And he was like, well, what's that? So that's kind of my first kind of tip to you is if you don't know about it, and folks on this call may do, or people that maybe are watching recording, is make sure you let people around you know, or your manager know about it. They might not even know that it exists. So that was, for me, was to kind of let them know and share that. And here's a list of other questions that kind of came up that I got asked around the cross-platform story and what skill sets do I need? In our organization, route if we had no one else to support it. We had plenty of web developers, so the Office add-in model really fit well with that. What does Microsoft recommend? We didn't want to go away from what they're recommending. They're putting their resources and time into Office add-in, and we had a blank slate. We were fortunate. I know some people might be coming from older add-ins and they need to kind of address so they're not in the same position we were at, but we were at a blank slate, so we wanted to make sure that we kind of followed the direction that Microsoft was going. So the best way to do it, go learn, my tip is go check out the docs. 2-3 years ago, they were good back then, but they've gotten better and the team is engaged. I've had multiple times where I've put in issues into the docs in GitHub, and I've actually had different sections added that hopefully has helped other developers out there. So I think if as a community, we all, you go here to learn, but then also you give back to it, I think it'll help everyone. And it's the best way that you can kind of answer some of these questions and educate your kind of stakeholders. The second step after we kind of educated them, I said, well, let me go build a prototype so you guys can see this cross-platform. And you can see here in this screenshot, I had created one for the Mac. I develop on the Mac most of the time. And I just created this really rough kind of just one big button, some fake mock data, and I did it. And so you see here, I got maybe 3 rows, 5 or 6 columns. And I proved to them, hey, it works. I showed them on all the different platforms. And everyone was like, wow, this is really cool. Maybe we should do this. And so I was given a designer, and the designer and I went and started working on it. And we got our first alpha version out. And I handed it to my first user. And the very first thing the user did was choose 85 columns, 200,000 records, and hit execute query, and the whole thing blew up. So my first pro tip, if you're going to go prototype, make sure it's real world scenario. When I was doing my prototype and trying to do the comparison, say, is the Office add-in model ready? This wasn't a very good what we really wanted to accomplish. So one, our platform was in the early days. This is about 2-3 years ago. So our backend didn't like that the query was that big. Second, Office at that time needed some work. And third, my code. I wasn't that familiar with the Office add-in model. How I had coded some of the things was not very efficient. So my tip is make sure that if you do kind of prototype something, make sure you prototype it so that it's similar. It doesn't have to be all the bells and whistles, but make sure it's similar to your real world scenario. It'll help you out so that you don't get to the first customer or first kind of even user and they'll be like, this thing doesn't work. So that's one of my tips. Also, you're lucky today, you guys. At that time when I was starting, we didn't have script labs, or if we did, I didn't know about it. So as you saw, I built just my own standalone prototype. But now today I use script labs a lot. So if you're not using it, I encourage you to check it out. I even still to this day, even now that I'm more familiar with it, like the other day, I wanted to check out how to what I needed to put in for the date formatting, and I was playing around with those so I could just quickly kind of iterate on it to see how I would get international dates, or there's certain things like that, or numbers, and those are the different types of things. So you can really quickly do those types. So definitely check it out if you're not using it today. So now we had that performance issue, and it kind of blew up on that first customer, or my first user. And I kind of started going back to my boss, and I was like, well, I found that the eventing wasn't very nice. Again, this is about 2-3 years ago. Performance, yeah, we need to do some work on our back end, but we also need to see what's going on, because now that we're doing this large data set, it's not very performant. And so we were kind of back and forth, like, should we just go back to VSTO? We know we can get the performance we want, or should we stick with this? And I definitely was kind of nudging my boss to stick this way, because I felt like it was the right choice. Again, just because the way the users, the developer skills we had in-house, as well as the direction that Microsoft is going, I felt like it was the best. Also, I'm on a Mac, so I want to use it. I want to use the add-in on the Mac. So I was kind of greedily myself wanting to go this way. So what I did is I engaged Microsoft, and this was probably the thing that really kept us going forward with the Office add-in model. First, put in user voice request, as you can see, just so that we just saw from the Edge and discussion and how they're listening and that. I'm typically not as big of this is coming from me personally. I'm not as big of a fan of user voice, just because it doesn't allow enough dialogue back and forth. But as you can see, the team is listening. They are looking at it. I've even gotten occasionally out of it reviewing API designs with them, so even the eventing. I've also gotten reached out to from other teams, like the Visual Studio team. It wasn't even the Office team. They reached out because they wanted to work on some developer tools, and were asking for my feedback on there. So it's definitely, be patient, but put your voice out there so it's at least heard. And sometimes you may not hear anything from 6 to 9 months, or you might hear something right away, but they're definitely listening, as you can see from the Edge thing. So that's one recommendation. The other is engage on GitHub. So I did, if you guys will go check out, if you're on there, issue number 12 here that I got a screenshot of, that was kind of that first one that came out of that very first version, where all of a sudden the performance just was not there. And first I got to engage with a lot of the engineers as well as product managers, and they gave me code refactoring tips. So that was already got a huge win. One thing I was doing was I was setting the data types for every single cell for a section of data. Instead, what I should have been doing is setting it for every column. And that was a good tip that I was able to get back. Also, they kind of reassured me at that time that this was the way that Microsoft wants to go, and they are focusing, and they recognize that there's this performance challenges. And if you are coming back to the Office add-in model, or you kind of are shying away from it, and because you looked at it a year or 2 years ago, I encourage you to look at it now. The right performance, especially in Excel, that's where my experience is much. It's very fast. I think it's getting very close to the VSTO and all those, so I'm sure the guys can talk about how close that is. But that was enough for me to be able to tell my manager, hey, we're working with them, I'm talking to them, I have dialogue, I think we should continue to go forward with this. We're not pressed. Again, we were fortunate, we were starting blank slate. We weren't pressed like we were trying to convert an old one. So we were able to be a little bit more patient with this, and it's paid off now because the performance is very, very good, and our users are really happy. The second thing is, again, going back to, by engaging them, we've helped, hopefully you guys as well, you've seen probably there's a new performance best practices page out there. That got out there, that helps the community, that hopefully I even still go back to from time to time to kind of check out to see if there's new best practices, or maybe to make sure I'm still doing things correctly. So I think it's really important to kind of engage. Also, when you do put in issues, this is just coming from me, and if you've ever been a developer, I just had this week, this happened to me. Try to put in the script lab gist. That's going to help it go faster. That's partially why I think I got such good feedback on this issue. I was pretty detailed about testing across the different performance, sharing code. I think you're going to get a much better. I had an experience this week where a developer just said, hey, it's not working. And then you're like, okay, well, what's not working? I click this button, and then you got to kind of keep teasing it out, and that just takes a lot of time. So if you can help them out, I think they're definitely going to be more willing to help you out. The last kind of thing I wanted is a little more technical. In the interest of time, I won't dive into all these, but use the web platform. If you ever seen on Twitter, you know, people say use the platform, use the web, and now with this announcement of the Edge preview, we're getting to the point where there's a lot of cool features that you can take advantage of. And our add-ins actually is taking advantage of quite a few of these, and these are what can actually give you more of that native feel. And this is what web developers. So if you're an experienced web developer and maybe you shied away or you just didn't want to add complexity, I out. Or if you're a .NET developer coming to web development and you're trying to learn about the web, these are definitely some more advanced features I'd recommend taking advantage of. So web workers are going to be multi-threading in JavaScript. You have a UI thread, and then you can have background thread to kind of offload work. WebSockets are going to give you a low-level communication on a TCP connection, really fast, two-way communication that you can take advantage of, and you can kind of control how data is sent over the wire. Compared to the request response of HTTP. IndexedDB is going to give you a local document storage, so you can cache lookup list or even data that you want. Or if you want to create an offline mode, you could do that with IndexedDB to load stuff from local. Now with the Edge, kind of I put a caveat here, service worker. Now you have this Edge preview, you're going to be able to take advantage of service workers. And that's basically caching your application so that it can load. If the index.html file hasn't changed or any of your JavaScript, there's no reason to go back to the server and get it. They can just load it locally. And so that's going to give you a fast startup time to your add-in, and again, make it feel more native. And then some stuff that I've been playing around with that's more fun is like if you're playing with TensorFlow.js and you want to look at offloading work, not just graphics, but computation to the GPU, you can take advantage of WebGL and take a look at that. That one's pretty advanced. Also, a caveat to that one is Excel is pretty powerful as it is. So if it's something you can do in Excel, there's no reason to try to add complexity there. Kim, I'm up on a little bit of time. Do I have enough to just do 30-second demo?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a couple minutes if you want to go ahead.
Okay, cool. So we'll just close out of this just to give you a quick demo of the add-in. So ours is BXV Digital. We call it Bricks Explorer out on the Office store. But data sources is kind of the back end, how we allow users, more technical users, to look at our back end data model and kind of choose out the fields, rename them, filters, all that. So that's more of an advanced user, but most typical users are going to come in and hit Explore Data, which is going to open up a side panel here. And we get a list of tables that have been synced into this workbook. We sync the tables into the workbook because we want the workbook itself to be this shareable unit that people can email, put in OneDrive, wherever, and that anybody that's a user of our Bricks platform can come in, log in, and then see the actual tables. And so what I'm going to do is just kick off download. We just introduced a download all and kind of multi-select. What this is going to do is kick off. And what's happening here is while this is loading is if you kind of see there, one best practice is we're clearing the table out, and then we're writing the data in chunks. And right now you can see it's kind of doing like an kind of indeterminate loading. And that's because it's just doing, and then right there it shifts over. So taking advantage of, this is one that this week got a lot of praise from our users, is just being able to show the feedback of how data is getting downloaded. Allows them to know, do they need to go grab coffee, do not? And these are just tricks that you use as a web developer to kind of give good experience. Also, what's kind of going on there is I'm taking advantage of the web. Again, those web workers, the web sockets, I'm offloading all that network to this background thread, and I'm allowing the UI thread just to communicate with Excel. And so as soon as I know that the network portion of it's done, I can let the UI know, and that's why you start getting this kind of percentage, and they can kind of go. We can also allow them to start canceling stuff a lot easier. So those are some cool features of WebSockets we were able to kind of do. You can do it with HTTP request as well, but it's a little different. The other thing that's kind of interesting, you saw there, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 columns, 200,000 rows. That was about 20, 30 seconds. So if you're worried about performance fast, we're not doing anything crazy here, adding calculations or doing anything like that. So folks that might have that, but just a pure download, write speed, clear speed, you can see that the performance is greatly improved. If you would have looked at this a year, 2 years ago, it's definitely improved greatly. The other thing I'll just show is one other thing that we've done that our users have really liked is kind of a tip, is that we have this settings for each table, and we kind of give users this decision of how they want to. Since ours is just about getting raw data down, we're not doing any complex calculations most of the time. We kind of set this default kind of thing that says delete the table that follows the Office.js best practices, and then it re-downloads all the data. But if a user wants to clear the existing table, they can go ahead and choose that instead. And if I go over here and we'll click on the cost profiles, instead of deleting the whole table, what they can do is just clear it. And what that'll do is just go down. It didn't get rid of the table. It just got rid of the data in it. And then that it's going to be a little bit slower, especially on some of the larger data sets. So there's an area that I'd love to see the engineering team, if they're listening, to improve on, especially on the Mac. What that's going to do is allow you to keep your references, so to tables or other formulas that a user may have added on other sheets. It'll be able to do that. So we kind of give that power to the user to decide. And then in some users, they just said, hey, I don't even want your table. I just want the data. And so we've done that as well. So those are just some tips on what we've experienced, and so far we've gotten good feedback from users on those. So with that, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I don't know if Kim, if you want to do questions right now, but we can do that. So that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. That's really awesome. It's always great to hear from customers in terms of how they've managed their journey through Office.js, and I think there's some great learnings there for everyone, especially the part about engaging with Microsoft. So really encourage folks to engage with us on GitHub in the Office.js repo, as well as user voice. And continue, helping us get your feedback, helping us hear your input, so we can roll that input into our platform in the days ahead. So thanks, Lance. That's really awesome.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Share my screen here one moment. Oops, wrong one. 1 second here.
Hey, Kim, there is one question for the presenter from Jim, and it is, do you use JS Framework, Angular, React, Vue?
Yeah, I answered in the chat window, but yes, I use Angular. And then UI component library everything's built on Angular. I try to do the Angular CDK as much as I can, since some of our stuff looks materially, but it's not quite material feel. So we've built quite a few components, our own components on top of the CDK, or we have used the Angular material components. So to answer to Jacob.
Awesome, thanks, Lance. 1 second here, having some technical difficulties with screen sharing. Actually, let's just go with this for now. I'm gonna go ahead and share. Okay, so we're just going to look at this view for now. So just to wrap up here today, the reason we connected with Lance, the way we connected with Lance, is he submitted this form, aka AMS Office Add-ins Engaged, to reach out to us to let us know, hey, I'm interested in presenting on an add-ins call and sharing what we've learned about Office.js through the years. And if you're interested in presenting on a call, we really would love you to reach out to us, or if you're interested in providing feedback about the documentation, developer tools, resources, anything like that, we'd love to engage with you. Please do fill out this form, and I'll be in touch to coordinate a time for us to connect. We'd love to hear from you and get your input. So I think, Doug, are we kind of caught up on questions in the chat window? I think we've had a couple of last-minute questions come in here. 1 second,
yeah,
let's take a look.
We have several we're going to follow up for the blog post that we don't have answers right now. So I think we're caught up on the ones we can handle right now.
So we're kind of caught up on the questions here in the chat window. Like Doug said, the ones we can handle now. If your question didn't get answered in the chat window, keep an eye out for the blog post that'll be coming out in the next few days that recaps this call. At the bottom of that blog post, we always include a list of all the questions that came in, both via the form. Some of you submitted questions via the form ahead of time. Those will be answered in the blog post. And any questions that went unanswered today during the call will also be answered in the blog post. So keep an eye out for that. As we always do, just closing out with a list of developer resources for you to learn more about the Office Add-ins platform and to engage with us via Stack Overflow, GitHub, User Voice. And that brings us to the end of the call today. We'll wrap up a few minutes early. Really appreciate everyone joining us. The recording will be available soon on our Office Developer YouTube channel. And as I mentioned earlier, our next call is exactly 1 month from today, March 13th. We encourage you to submit your questions ahead of time. If you do have questions for us, feel free to submit them via that Office add-ins form link. As I said, if we don't answer the questions during the call, we'll certainly answer the questions in the blog post. And if you don't already have the series, please do add it to your calendar. It's a monthly call, and you can do that using the last link on this slide. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in March.